3 years of silence, 1,000 days without a single word, not even a whisper, not even in her sleep. When 11-year-old Amara Hassan walked onto the America's Got Talent stage, she carried with her the weight of a war that had stolen everything: her family, her home, her country, and her voice. Simon Cowell thought he was about to witness another inspiring story of a young refugee overcoming adversity. He had no idea he was about to see something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about trauma, healing, and the power of music to resurrect what seems lost forever. What happened when Amara opened her mouth and sang for the first time in 3 years wouldn't just move an audience to tears. It would prove that some bonds are stronger than bombs, that love can survive even the cruelest destruction, and that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that refuses to stay buried, no matter how much pain tried to silence it. When her mother's lullaby filled that theater, when those Arabic words carried across the silence like prayers answered, Simon Cowell discovered that witnessing someone find their voice again is more profound than any performance he'd ever judged. Let me take you back to the moments before Amara Hassan showed the world that some songs are too important to forget, even when everything else has been torn away. It was Monday evening at the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, and America's Got Talent was in the middle of what would become its most emotionally transformative season yet. The familiar energy buzzed through the venue, 3,400 audience members filling the red velvet seats, many of them families from various immigrant communities who had come specifically because word had spread about Amara's story through social media and community organizations. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table in his signature black t-shirt and perfectly tailored blazer, but tonight his expression carried more gravity than usual. The producers had briefed him about this particular contestant in terms that were unprecedented. They'd explained that simply getting her to speak, let alone perform, would represent a breakthrough that transcended entertainment and entered the realm of medical miracle. Sofia Vergara was unusually quiet, having been deeply moved during the pre-show briefing about Amara's journey from war zone to refugee camp to her new life in America. Heidi Klum and Howie Mandel were both subdued, understanding that they were about to witness something that challenged every assumption they had about what belonged on a talent show. Terry Crews had spent extra time preparing for this introduction, knowing that his usual exuberance might need to be tempered for someone dealing with severe trauma. The evening had already been emotional, but everyone involved in the production understood that what was about to happen would be different. This wasn't about discovering talent. This was about witnessing healing, about seeing whether music really could reach places that therapy, medicine, and time had not been able to touch. Backstage, Amara Hassan sat in the contestant waiting area, but she wasn't sitting alone. Beside her was Dr. Fatima al-Rashid, the woman who had become more than just her foster mother over the past 2 years. She had become Amara's lifeline, her translator, her bridge between the terrifying silence that trauma had created and the world that was still trying to reach her. "How are you feeling, Habibi?" Fatima asked gently in Arabic, though she knew Amara wouldn't respond verbally. For 3 years, Amara had communicated only through gestures, through drawings, through the kind of elaborate sign language that trauma survivors create when words become too dangerous to use. Amara looked at Fatima with eyes that held too much wisdom for 11 years of life, then placed her hand over her heart and nodded slightly. It was their signal. It meant scared but ready, the closest thing to confidence that Amara had been able to express since the day her world ended. The journey to this moment had been long and heartbreaking. Amara had been 8 years old when the bombs fell on Aleppo, when her apartment building collapsed with her parents and younger brother inside, when she was pulled from the rubble after 17 hours of digging by rescue workers who couldn't believe a child had survived. The physical injuries had healed relatively quickly, but the psychological damage had been immediate and complete. She had stopped speaking the day they told her that her family was gone. Not gradually, not through some process of withdrawal. She had simply closed her mouth and never opened it again for words. The refugee camp psychologists had tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, group sessions with other children who had lost families. Nothing worked. Amara existed in a bubble of silence that seemed impenetrable. It was Dr. Fatima al-Rashid, a child psychologist specializing in war trauma, who had volunteered at the refugee camp, who first noticed that Amara responded to music, not by speaking, not by singing, but by moving slightly, by showing the first signs of engagement she'd displayed since the bombing. Music lives in a different part of the brain than speech, Fatima had explained to the other workers. Sometimes, when trauma locks down verbal communication, music can still find a way through. The adoption process had taken 18 months, during which Fatima had worked tirelessly to create a safe space where Amara might eventually feel secure enough to heal. They had moved to Los Angeles, where Fatima took a position at UCLA's Trauma Center, and began the slow process of rebuilding a life around a child who had seen too much, lost too much, survived too much. Amara Hassan, called Maria, one of the production assistants, her voice unusually gentle. The entire AGT staff had been briefed on Amara's situation, and everyone understood that they were facilitating something that was as much therapeutic intervention as it was entertainment. Amara stood up slowly, adjusting the colorful headscarf that covered part of her long dark hair. She wore a traditional blue and gold dress that Fatima had chosen carefully, something that honored her Syrian heritage while making her feel beautiful and confident. In her hand, she clutched a small photo of her parents and brother, the only picture she had managed to save from the destruction. "Remember," Fatima said quietly in Arabic, "you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But if you feel ready to sing Mama's song, she will hear you, wherever she is." Amara nodded, then did something that surprised Fatima. She reached out and hugged her foster mother tightly, the kind of hug that said everything she couldn't speak out loud. "I'll be right in the wings," Fatima whispered. "I won't leave you alone out there." Terry Crew's voice carried across the theater with unusual gentleness. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Amara Hassan." The curtain rose, and Amara began the walk that would either remain the longest, most terrifying journey of her life or become the first step in reclaiming her voice. The audience's reaction was immediate and tender. Even from a distance, Amara's fragility was apparent, but so was something else, a dignity, a quiet strength that seemed remarkable in someone so young who had endured so much. She moved carefully, like someone who had learned not to trust that the ground would remain stable beneath her feet. Simon leaned forward, studying Amara with a mixture of curiosity and deep respect. There was something about this child that commanded attention, not through performance or charisma, but through simple presence, through the weight of a story that was written in every careful step she took. "Good evening," Terry said softly, approaching Amara with the kind of gentle respect one would show to visiting royalty. Amara looked at him, then immediately turned to find Fatima in the wings. Seeing her there, exactly where she'd promised to be, gave Amara just enough courage to respond, not with words, but with a small nod of acknowledgement. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Terry asked gently. Amara was quiet for a long moment, then raised her hands and began to sign. Fatima had taught the production team some basic signs, and a translator appeared on screen for the audience. "My name is Amara Hassan." "And how old are you, Amara?" Again, Amara signed, and the translation appeared. "I am 11 years old." "Where are you from originally?" This time, Amara's signing was more deliberate, more emotional, and the translation read, "I am from Syria, from Aleppo. My city is gone now." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the audience, and Simon found himself leaning forward even more, beginning to understand the scope of what this child had experienced. "And Amara," Terry continued gently, "we understand that you haven't spoken in a long time. Can you tell us why?" Amara's hands moved slowly, carefully, as she signed her response. "My words died when my family died. It's been 3 years since I talked because there was no one left to talk to." The theater fell completely silent. 3,400 people were absorbing the reality that this 11-year-old child had survived a trauma so profound that it had stolen her ability to speak. "But you're here tonight," Terry said. "What brings you to this stage?" Amara's response was longer this time, her hands moving with growing confidence. "My new mama, Dr. Fatima, she says music lives in a different place than words. She says maybe I can sing, even if I can't talk, and I want to sing my real mama's song, the lullaby she used to sing to me and my little brother before the bombs came." Simon felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just a performance anymore. This was a child attempting to reconnect with her lost family through the only medium that might be able to bridge that impossible distance. "That sounds very special, Amara," Terry said. "Are you ready to try?" Amara nodded, then signed one more message. "If my voice comes back, it means my mama can hear me again." The simplicity and hopefulness of that statement broke hearts throughout the theater. "All right, Amara," Terry said, stepping back carefully. "Take all the time you need." Amara stood at center stage, looking smaller than ever under the bright lights, holding the wireless microphone like it was both a lifeline and a terrifying responsibility. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her eyes closed, seeming to gather courage from some invisible source. Then she opened her eyes, looked directly at the camera that she knew would broadcast this moment to millions of people around the world, and tried to speak. At first, nothing came out. Her mouth moved, but no sound emerged. She tried again and managed only a whisper of air, barely audible through the microphone. The audience held its breath, understanding that they were witnessing someone literally fighting to reclaim their voice. Amara closed her eyes again, and this time when she opened them, she wasn't looking at the audience, or the judges, or the cameras. She was looking at the photo of her family that she still clutched in her free hand, and then, so quietly that the theater had to strain to hear it, she began to hum. It was barely audible at first, just a melody, wordless but hauntingly beautiful, the kind of lullaby that mothers have sung to children across cultures and centuries. The tune was Middle Eastern, ancient, carrying the weight of tradition and love across generations. Simon's expression shifted immediately. Even without words, even as quiet as it was, there was something in that melody that spoke directly to the heart, something that transcended language and reached straight into the deepest places of human emotion. As Amara continued to hum, her voice grew slightly stronger, more confident. The melody filled the theater with a sweetness that seemed impossible given everything she had endured. Then, miracle of miracles, she began to add words, not in English, but in Arabic, the language of her childhood, the language her mother had used to sing her to sleep, the language that connected her to everything she had lost. "Nami, Nami, ya habibti, sleep, sleep, my beloved." The words were soft, tentative, like someone testing whether their voice was really there or just imagined, but they were words, real words. The first she'd spoken in 3 years. "Nami wa la tchafi," sleep and don't be afraid. As Amara continued, her voice grew stronger, more sure. The lullaby unfolded like a flower opening, each phrase a little clearer, a little more confident than the last. The audience was transfixed. Many people were openly crying, not just at the beauty of the melody, but at witnessing what was clearly a miraculous moment of healing. Sophia had her hands pressed to her heart, tears streaming down her face as she watched this child literally sing herself back to life. Heidi was leaning forward, completely absorbed in the transformation she was witnessing. Howie was unusually still, understanding that he was seeing something that transcended entertainment and entered the realm of the sacred. But it was Simon's reaction that was most profound. This man who had built his career on technical critique and commercial viability was watching something that challenged every assumption he had about what performance meant. "Alayl sakin wa anti amina," the night is peaceful and you are safe. As Amara sang, something remarkable was happening to her physical presence. Her posture was straightening, her voice was growing stronger, and most importantly, her face was beginning to show something it hadn't shown in 3 years: peace. "Mama ma'aki," Fikul Makan, Mama is with you everywhere. When Amara sang that line, when she sang about her mother being with her everywhere, her voice cracked slightly with emotion, but she didn't stop. She kept singing, kept pushing through the pain, kept using music to bridge the gap between loss and love. The lullaby built to a gentle crescendo, Amara's voice now filling the theater with a sweetness and purity that seemed to heal something in everyone who heard it. This wasn't just a song, it was a prayer, a conversation with the dead, a child's way of saying that love doesn't end when life does. Nami, Nami, Yaruhi, sleep, sleep, my soul. Bukra raha nashafnor, tomorrow we will see light. As Amara reached the final phrases of the lullaby, her voice soared with a confidence that seemed impossible from someone who hadn't spoken in 3 years. She was no longer the traumatized refugee child who had walked onto the stage. She was a daughter singing to her mother, a sister remembering her brother, a survivor proving that some bonds are stronger than death. Wa ma'a al-fajr al-farha, traji, and with dawn, joy returns. The final note hung in the air like a blessing, and for several seconds, the Dolby Theater remained in complete silence. Amara opened her eyes, looked down at the photo of her family, and whispered in English, the first English word she had spoken in 3 years. I sang for you, Mama. Did you hear me? The silence broke with applause that was unlike anything in AGT history. It wasn't just appreciation for a beautiful performance. It was recognition of witnessing a miracle, celebration of triumph over unimaginable trauma, acknowledgement of the power of love to transcend even death. But Amara barely heard the applause because she was staring in wonder at the microphone in her hand as if she couldn't believe that sounds, real words, had actually come out of her mouth. Terry approached her carefully, tears in his own eyes. Amara, how do you feel? And for the first time in 3 years, Amara answered out loud in English, I feel like my mama is proud of me. The judges were all standing, but it was Simon who spoke first, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't contain. Amara, he said, and had to pause to collect himself. I need you to understand what just happened here. Amara looked at him with those wise, ancient eyes, waiting. What you just did wasn't just singing. What you just did was one of the most courageous things I have ever witnessed in 20 years of judging talent. Simon's voice was carrying more emotion than anyone had ever heard from him. You lost your family, your home, your country, your language, and your voice. And tonight, you used music to find your way back to all of them. You sang in the language your mother taught you, you shared her lullaby with all of us, and you proved that love is stronger than war, stronger than death, stronger than anything that tries to silence it. The audience was hanging on every word, understanding that Simon was articulating something profound about the power of music to heal. Amara, you didn't just find your voice tonight. You found your mother's voice, your brother's memory, your country's song. You proved that refugees don't just bring their trauma to new countries. They bring their culture, their beauty, their music that can heal not just themselves, but everyone who hears it. Simon looked out at the audience, then back at Amara. And to everyone watching who thinks that refugees are just people fleeing from something, Amara just proved that refugees are people carrying something beautiful with them, something the world needs to hear. Amara was crying now, but they were different tears than she had cried for 3 years. These weren't tears of loss and trauma. These were tears of joy, of connection, of remembering that she was more than just a survivor. Thank you, she said clearly in English. Thank you for letting me sing my mama's song. Simon looked at his fellow judges, then back at Amara. Amara Hassan, what you shared with us tonight deserves more than just applause. It deserves recognition that will help other refugee children understand that their voices matter, that their stories deserve to be heard, that their culture is a gift to their new countries. He walked to his golden buzzer with absolute conviction. Amara, you came here tonight not just to sing, but to prove to yourself that your voice was still there. You succeeded beyond anything anyone could have imagined. And now we want to help you share that voice with the world. Simon slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling, but this time it felt like celebration of resurrection, a voice reclaimed of a child who had sung her way back from silence into the light. Through all the falling gold, Amara looked up at the confetti and laughed, a sound that was as beautiful as her singing, the sound of joy returning to someone who had forgotten what it felt like. She ran to the edge of the stage where Fatima waited in the wings and threw herself into her foster mother's arms. "I did it, Mama Fatima," she said clearly in English. "I found my voice. Mama can hear me now." "She always could hear you, Habibi," Fatima replied, crying with joy. "But now the whole world can hear you too." 3 months later, Amara Hassan won America's Got Talent, becoming the youngest refugee contestant to ever take the title. Her victory performance was an original song she had written in both Arabic and English called Bridge of Voices, which became an anthem for refugee children worldwide. But the numbers and recognition weren't the real story. The real story was in the thousands of messages Amara received from refugee children who said her performance gave them hope that their voices mattered too. It was in the therapy programs that began incorporating her story as an example of what healing could look like. It was in the Arabic language classes that started in schools across America as communities realized they wanted to understand the beautiful lullabies that children like Amara carried with them. Simon Cowell, deeply moved by what he had witnessed, established the Amara Hassan Foundation for refugee children, providing music therapy and cultural preservation programs for displaced families worldwide. But perhaps Amara's most important contribution was changing the conversation about what refugees bring to their new countries. Her story became a bridge between communities, proving that immigrants don't just need help, they have gifts to offer, stories to tell, songs to sing that can heal not just themselves, but the communities that welcome them. 6 months after her AGT victory, Amara performed at the United Nations Refugee Day ceremony, singing her mother's lullaby to an audience of world leaders and advocates. 3 years ago, she told the assembly in clear, confident English, "I thought my voice was gone forever. Tonight, I want every refugee child watching to know that your voice is not lost. It's just waiting for the right moment to remind the world how beautiful it is." She closed her eyes, just like she had on that first night, and began to sing Nami, Nami, Ya Habibti, the lullaby that had brought her back to life and proved that some songs are too important to be silenced by war, loss, or fear. The lesson Amara Hassan taught the world that night is profound. Trauma may steal our voices temporarily, but it cannot destroy the songs that live in our hearts. Culture survives war, love transcends death, and sometimes the most important performances are the ones that remind us that we are all connected by the universal language of music and the unbreakable bonds of love. Simon Cowell learned that being a judge sometimes means recognizing when someone isn't just performing, they're healing, they're connecting with lost loved ones. They're proving that the human spirit is stronger than any force that tries to break it. And Amara proved that refugees don't just flee from something, they carry with them treasures of culture, music, and resilience that can enrich any community brave enough to listen, to welcome, to understand that diversity of voices makes the world's song more beautiful, not more complicated. The golden confetti from that night has been swept away, but the golden moment it represented, when a Syrian refugee child sang her way from silence to voice, from trauma to healing, from loss to love, that moment continues to inspire, to heal, and to prove that some bridges between hearts cannot be destroyed by war, built from music and maintained by the courage to keep singing, even when the world gives you every reason to stay silent. In the end, Amara Hassan didn't just sing a lullaby, she sang proof that mother's love survives death, that culture survives displacement, that voices survive silence, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remember the songs that made you who you are and trust that someone, somewhere, needs to hear them too.